Let's now bring in Percy Lazard, Assistant Professor of Indigenous Studies at Wilfrid Laurier University. Thank you for your time, Percy. Appreciate it.
Why Haskell how why you squeezed in teaching. I first want to raise my hands up to the survivors, those who never came home. Of course, Starblinka First Nation, who shared their ground penetrating radar information of 2,000 anomalies, and those who went to St. Mary's Mission here in Ontario, Northern Ontario, and the 71 anomalies, and Indigenous folks, First Nations, Métis, Afro-Indigenous, Black Indigenous, content warning, trigger warning. We're having this very complex, intense, weighted conversation in relation to something that you may have or someone that you may have known who went to day school and or residential school.
Yeah, Percy, clearly in what you've also mentioned, there is so much work that still needs to be done here. But let's just begin by asking you and get your reaction. How are you assessing this settlement that has come 10 years after the suit was filed? The minister says this is first of its kind.
I think it's a starting point. It's not the end point. I think there needs to be multiple interventions when it comes to the ongoing healing from the multi-generational trauma that Indigenous individuals, families, communities, and nations experience. And every week, various nations continue to engage in various projects related to ground penetrating data, hearing stories of what it was like to go to day schools or Indian residential schools, and to have news announcements from First Nations themselves about the anomalies in the ground. So it's not only Indigenous people don't get a break. Every week it's how do we brace for more information about the ongoing harms that happen to us, what non-Indigenous people may think it's a thing of the past, but it still impacts Indigenous individuals, families, communities, and nations on the daily by hearing news like this. It might be a large number, and people think, well, they had the TRC, they had the compensation programs, but like the two previous chiefs, it didn't cover the experiences of the ways in the then new iteration of day schools, with which I'm directly impacted when my life provider and their siblings were forced to go to day schools, whereas my life giver went to Indian residential school, and the harms in both systems were harmful, and they impacted how they were as individuals on their homelands, with their families, their communities, and nations,
right.
And the harms they experienced in those systems that were not developed by Indigenous people to say, here's a way in which we can be honored and celebrated. We're not in consultation to say, here's how we raise up Indigenous people to be and coexist with non-Indigenous people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. I mean, for them, this is an ongoing story, and the hurt and the pain keeps revisiting them, especially when news like that keeps coming up. But let me ask you, you did mention about your own family here, Percy. With this announcement that has come in today of this settlement of $2.8 billion, what was their reaction? What are they sharing with you today?
Much like many people have had their own mixed reactions related to the Prime Minister in 2011 and all the political parties, or the Pope and the Pope's visit, Indigenous people, First Nations, Métis, Inuit, Afro-Indigenous people get to have their own experiences and what they might be and reactions to that. Some people welcomed those as a part of their healing. Some people thought it wasn't enough. And some people reminded other things that these various systems continue to do to place barriers and ensuring that all the relatives who were forced to go into these systems of the Indian residential school and the new iteration of the day schools who never came home, by blocking information that give the records. Where are our relatives? Because someone somewhere knows where all of our relatives are, right, and where they are buried and where they were disposed and their humanity taken from them, and not allowing their family members to grieve and appropriately care for them with their own Indigenous protocols.
Right.
For not having come home either from the day schools and or the Indian residential schools.
Absolutely. Like you said in the beginning of this conversation, Percy, this is just the beginning. It's the first step towards many more steps that need to be taken. Percy Lazard, we appreciate you joining us on the show. Thank you so much for joining us on CTV News Channel.